You know the moment I am about to describe, for you have lived it. You entered a room with every advantage, logic, preparation, the rightness of your position, and somehow left diminished. Your arguments were sound, perhaps even irrefutable, yet the man who spoke least commanded most. He did not defeat your reasoning. He simply rendered it irrelevant. You talked yourself into weakness whilst he remained silent into strength. This is not misfortune. It is not even injustice. It is the operation of a law as reliable as gravity, a law you have been violating your entire life without knowing it existed. The common man believes that to influence he must argue, that to persuade he must explain, that to dominate he must proclaim. He has been taught from nursery to university that articulation is power, and that silence is merely its absence. He is catastrophically wrong. What I offer in these pages is not a collection of clever techniques. It is a complete reconstruction of how you occupy space, engage opposition, and project that ineffable quality which causes others to defer before you have spoken. The transformation will not be comfortable, but when it is complete, you will possess something that no eloquence, however brilliant, could ever provide: the authority of one who needs not speak to be heard. The awakening of eyes. The paradox of the loudest voice in my long years of public life. Navigating the treacherous waters of Parliament, commanding the attention of monarchs, and matching wits with the most formidable minds of our age. I have arrived at a conclusion that may startle those who know me chiefly for my speeches. The greatest victories I have ever witnessed, indeed the most devastating defeats I have ever inflicted, were accomplished without the utterance of a single syllable. Here lies a paradox worth examining. We live in an age besotted with words, yet the man who truly commands his circumstances speaks least and conveys most. Consider this: the moment you open your mouth, you transform yourself from an unknown quantity into a known one. In any contest of wills, the known quantity operates at profound disadvantage. Your opponent now possesses information about you, your position, your reasoning, your emotional state, whilst you have gained nothing of him. You have, in the language of the card table, shown your hand whilst he keeps his close to his chest. This is not mere metaphor. It is the fundamental arithmetic of human influence. I observed this truth most vividly at a negotiation involving Lord Curzon, a man of formidable intellect and magnificent eloquence. He arrived prepared as few men ever prepare, documents organized, arguments marshaled, precedents at the ready. His opponent arrived with nothing but composure. For 3 hours Curzon deployed his considerable gifts. His adversary said perhaps 10 words, yet with each passing hour Curzon's elaborate edifice crumbled against the impenetrable fortress of that wordless presence. By the session's end, Curzon had conceded points he had sworn to defend. The silent man departed, having surrendered nothing. What occurred in that room illustrates what I call the law of diminishing authority. Observe how it operates. The first sentence commands attention. The fifth invites analysis. The 10th permits dismissal. Authority diminishes with each unnecessary word. Monarchs speak rarely. Generals give brief orders. The truly powerful express themselves in sentences, not speeches. This is not accident. It is the architecture of command. But the damage of excessive speech runs deeper still. Speech betrays not merely position, but emotion. The voice trembles when confidence wavers. It rushes when anxiety mounts. It overemphasizes precisely those points the speaker most doubts. Every word broadcasts not just thought but feeling, and these emotional leakages are detected instantly by opponents, who exploit them without mercy. The silent man betrays nothing. The talking man betrays everything. There is also what I term the strategic ambiguity advantage. The silent man retains all options. The speaking man forecloses them with every syllable. When you have not committed to a position, your opponent must prepare for every possibility. When you have spoken, he need prepare only for what you have revealed. Let me offer you a practical beginning. In your next conversation of significance, reduce your words by half. Where you would normally offer 3 arguments, offer 1. Where you would explain your reasoning, simply state your conclusion. Observe what happens. Others lean forward. They ask questions. They reveal their positions, seeking to understand yours. You have transformed from supplicant to authority. But here's the peculiar thing. The beginner who reduces his words often fills the resulting space with nervous energy, fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, radiating discomfort. This is worse than speaking. Silence must be inhabited, not merely tolerated. The chapters that follow shall teach you how. The 7 confessions of every voice, having established that speech reveals, we must now examine precisely what it reveals. The human voice, I have come to understand, is a confession box. Every time we speak, we confess, whether we intend to or not. The trained observer reads these confessions as clearly as printed text. You must learn both to read others and to stop your own voice from betraying you. I identify 7 confessions that every voice makes. The first is the confession of certainty or doubt. Listen carefully to any speaker, and you will note that the voice rises in pitch and quickens in pace when the speaker doubts his own words. Genuine certainty produces the opposite: a lower pitch, a slower pace, and a willingness to pause. The uncertain man rushes to fill spaces that the confident man leaves deliberately empty. The second confession is that of anxiety or calm. Nervous speech contains more words than necessary. The anxious man qualifies his statements, adds caveats, provides alternatives before being asked for them. Each addition signals his fear that his primary point was insufficient. The calm man states once and waits. His very economy announces his lack of concern about the response. I witnessed this tragically in a diplomat I knew well, a man of formidable intellect, who lost a crucial negotiation not through poor arguments, but through vocal tells his opponent read with devastating precision. His voice rose slightly when discussing points he knew to be weak. It rushed when he feared interruption. It overemphasized precisely what he most doubted. His opponent, saying almost nothing, simply waited for these confessions and exploited each in turn. The third confession is that of need or abundance. The man who needs agreement seeks eye contact after his statements, awaiting confirmation. His eyes ask, "Was that acceptable? Do you approve?" The man who needs nothing looks away after speaking as though the response were of no particular interest. This distinction is perceived immediately, even by those who could not name it. The fourth confession concerns truth or deception. Deception increases verbal complexity. More words, more qualifications, more narrative detail. Truth speaks simply because it need not construct. It merely reports. The elaborate answer often conceals what the simple answer would reveal. The fifth confession is status consciousness. The voice adjusts unconsciously to perceived status relationships. Note how the same man speaks differently to his superior, his equal, and his subordinate. These adjustments reveal his true assessment of relative position, which often differs markedly from what formal hierarchy would suggest. The sixth and seventh confessions, emotional investment and strategic intent, operate similarly. The voice that tightens around certain words reveals what matters most. The voice that carefully navigates around certain topics reveals what is being protected. I recommend you select one confession to observe for an entire week. Begin with the certainty tell. In every conversation, attend to pitch and pace. You will discover that you can predict, with increasing accuracy, when speakers doubt their own words. A word of caution: vocal tells are tendencies, not certainties. Context matters. The skilled observer gathers multiple signals before drawing conclusions. Why explanation is surrender, we have established that speech reveals and that voices confess. Now I must attack the most dangerous instinct of intelligent people, the belief that explaining oneself more thoroughly solves the problems created by speech. This instinct appears sensible. It is, in fact, disastrous. Every explanation implies doubt. Every justification suggests weakness. Every elaboration invites further questioning. The man who explains transforms himself from authority into advocate, from commander into supplicant. Consider this: when you explain, you implicitly accept that your position requires defense. You transform yourself from one stating facts to one making arguments, and this represents a profound reduction in status. The king does not explain, he proclaims. The subordinate explains, he hopes to convince. The very act of explanation places you in the subordinate position, regardless of your formal rank. I think of the Duke of Wellington, about whom I have studied extensively. His officers often complained that he explained nothing. He gave orders. He expected compliance. He expressed no anxiety about being understood or agreed with. "You will advance at dawn" required no elaboration. His officers wondered, perhaps complained privately, but they obeyed instantly. Contrast this with commanders who explained their plans in elaborate detail. Their subordinates debated endlessly. Wellington's men acted decisively. This was not arrogance on Wellington's part. It was mastery. He knew that the moment he began to explain, he would diminish himself. He would transform from commander to advocate, from authority to supplicant seeking agreement. His silence was not absence of thought, but presence of authority. There is also what I call the invitation to debate. Every reason you offer becomes a point that can be contested. Offer 3 reasons for your decision, and you have created 3 battlefields where one would have sufficed. The silent decision-maker presents no such targets. There is nothing to attack, nothing to debate. You see, the man who explains appears to need agreement. The man who simply proceeds appears not to care whether agreement exists. Which projects greater confidence? The answer is obvious. Yet most men persist in explanation. Let me offer practical guidance. The next time someone questions your decision, respond with the decision restated rather than with reasons. We shall proceed on Tuesday. If pressed, repeat with slight variation. Tuesday is when we proceed. The questioner, finding no argument to attack, typically falls silent. I recommend what I call the explanation fast. For 1 full day, offer no explanations for any decision. When asked why, respond with, because this is what we're doing. Note the responses and your own discomfort. This discomfort is the habit we are breaking. A necessary clarification: this principle applies to contests of influence, not to teaching or friendship. When your purpose is to help another understand, explanation serves. When your purpose is to command, explanation undermines. Wisdom lies in distinguishing between them. The architecture of presence. The telegram and the sealed letter Part 1 revealed what not to do. You understand now that speech exposes, that voices betray, that explanation surrenders. But understanding a problem is not the same as possessing a solution. A new question emerges. If not speech, then what? How does one communicate power without words? The answer begins with a distinction I find illuminating: the difference between the telegram and the sealed letter. When you speak, you send telegrams. They are efficient, clear, and utterly devoid of mystery. The recipient knows precisely what you think because you have told him. There is no ambiguity, no depth to plumb, nothing to wonder about. The telegram conveys information. It does not create impression. But when you communicate through presence alone, through bearing, through attention, through the quality of your silence, you send something altogether different. You send the sealed letter. The sealed letter is heavy with implied significance. The recipient does not know what it contains. He must open it with his own imagination. He invests it with meaning, with depth, with importance. He wonders. He speculates. He attributes to you thoughts and intentions that you may or may not possess, but that, remarkably often, redound to your advantage. I observed this principle at a reception where a certain foreign dignitary arrived late, not through rudeness but through understanding. He paused at the threshold. He surveyed the room with unhurried assessment, speaking to no one for several minutes. Yet by the time he uttered his first word, every person present had formed opinions about his importance, his character, his intentions. He had sent sealed letters to each of them, and they had opened those letters with their own imaginations. This leads to what I call the economy of mystery. Human beings are creatures of interpretation. We lean toward that which we do not fully understand. We invest our imagination in the unknown. The silent man benefits from this economy. Others fill his silence with depth, with significance, with power. The talking man receives no such benefit. He has already exhausted his mystery. Consider also the imagination investment. When you remain silent, others must imagine what you think. Their imaginations, remarkably often, supply conclusions more favorable than your actual thoughts. They project depth, wisdom, strategic reserve. But this works only when your silence is accompanied by composure. There is a practical application here. Before your next significant entry, to a meeting, a gathering, or an office, pause at the threshold. Take 3 seconds to survey the room. This pause transforms your entry from mere arrival into deliberate appearance. You have sent your first sealed letter before speaking a word. The principle underlying all of this I call the weight principle. Influence flows not from the volume of communication but from its weight, and weight is determined as much by what is withheld as by what is offered. The confidence that needs no words, We have established that silence creates mystery and commands attention. But what is the animating force behind effective silence? What separates the silence that impresses from the silence that merely puzzles or disturbs? The answer is confidence. But here I must share a truth that transformed my own understanding. Confidence is not what you feel, it is what you project. And the projection can be learned. In my early years in Parliament, I prepared elaborate speeches defending positions I was not entirely certain of myself. I believed that if I could construct sufficiently compelling arguments, I would persuade. The more I explained, the less I convinced. It was only when I began to observe the senior members, men who stated positions as though contradiction were simply unthinkable, that I perceived the pattern. These men did not feel more certain than I did. They simply behaved as though they did. The effect was indistinguishable from genuine certainty, and far more powerful than my elaborate justifications. They demonstrated confidence rather than declaring it. The man who says, "I am confident," is not. The man who simply proceeds without comment is. This leads to what I call the demonstration principle. Confidence is demonstrated through the manifest lack of any need to explain. The truly confident man treats the question of whether others understand or agree as fundamentally uninteresting. He proceeds, he occupies his space. He allows his actions to speak for themselves. Consider also what I term the indifference signal. The truly powerful man appears indifferent to whether others understand or agree. This apparent indifference projects such complete certainty that the question of external validation simply does not arise. Others sense that their approval is neither sought nor required. The less he appears to need their approval, the more readily they offer it. The practical technique I call the proceeding technique is simply this: when uncertain, proceed as though certain. The hesitation, the seeking of permission, the request for input, these broadcast doubt. The man who simply proceeds projects a certainty that others accept. "We shall do X" establishes a frame. "I think we should do X. What do you think?" invites them to question it. Perhaps the most important insight is what I call the separation of feeling from projection. Internal doubt need not produce external hesitation. Think of the actor on stage. He may feel terror. The audience sees only the character he portrays. You must learn to separate what you feel from what you show. I offer this practice. For 1 week, eliminate the word think from statements of decision. Replace "I think we should" with "we shall." Note the different responses you receive. A word of caution: the danger is confusing confidence with arrogance. Confidence does not require dismissing others. It simply does not seek their validation. The confident man listens attentively, but he does not await permission. The body that speaks before you do. We have established that presence is constructed from mystery and projected confidence. But how does one embody these abstractions in concrete behavior? The answer lies in understanding that the body speaks a language more ancient and more powerful than words. Every posture, every gesture, every moment of stillness or motion broadcasts information that others receive and interpret before your first syllable emerges. I observed this truth most clearly in the old King Edward VII at a state function I attended in my younger years. He said almost nothing throughout the evening. Yet every eye in that great room followed him. His movements were unhurried, his stillness profound. He touched nothing unnecessarily, moved only with deliberate purpose, and stood as though the very ground organized itself around his feet. The contrast with the chattering diplomats surrounding him was total and illuminating. The foundation of physical presence is stillness. The physically restless man cannot project command. Every fidget broadcasts uncertainty. Every unnecessary movement bleeds authority. The man who touches his face, adjusts his clothing, shifts his weight from foot to foot. This man announces to all observers that he is not at ease. Stillness must be cultivated until the body rests as a warship at anchor, impressive in its very immobility. Beyond stillness lies what I call the grammar of gesture. Every movement you make is a sentence in this grammar. The angle of the head conveys attention or dismissal. The set of the shoulders projects burden or ease. The position of the hands suggests openness or concealment. You must become conscious of these sentences until you can compose them deliberately. There is also what I term the pace principle. The anxious man moves quickly. The powerful man moves slowly. Speed suggests urgency, which implies external pressure, which in turn suggests lack of control over one's circumstances. Deliberate pace suggests the opposite, that time itself bends to your requirements. The powerful man also occupies space without apology. He does not compress himself to accommodate others. He does not defer with his posture. This is not aggression but presence, the simple assertion that his existence in this space is natural and unquestionable. I recommend a practice I call the stillness drill. Stand before a mirror for 5 minutes without moving anything except your breathing. No adjustment of clothing, no touching of face, no shifting of weight. You will discover how difficult this proves, and you will observe the quality of presence that emerges when you achieve it. But remember, stillness must not become rigidity. The powerful man is calm, not frozen. His stillness suggests readiness, not paralysis. These 7 disciplines of silence. Stopping the leaks before they sink you, the principles are now established. You understand that presence is constructed from mystery, projected confidence, and physical vocabulary. But understanding principles and embodying them are vastly different achievements. Part 3 addresses the gap between knowing and doing. We begin with the most urgent discipline, identifying and eliminating the unconscious channels through which power bleeds away. Most men leak information constantly, like ships riddled with holes below the waterline. Before such a vessel can sail effectively, the leaks must be found and plugged. Your leaks are the nervous laugh, the excessive nodding, the rushed response, the compulsive filling of every silence. Before presence can be projected, these hemorrhages must stop. I once mentored a young officer who possessed every quality for advancement: intelligence, courage, dedication, yet was consistently overlooked for promotion. I observed him carefully in conversation with his superiors and identified 12 distinct leakages: the head bob whilst listening, the quick smile after his own statements, the raised eyebrows seeking approval, the rushed "yes, sir" that preceded any actual thought. We eliminated these systematically over 6 months. His capabilities remained unchanged. His advancement transformed utterly. The most common leak is the nervous laugh. Laughter that serves not humor but anxiety. It fills uncomfortable spaces, signals desperate desire to be liked, broadcasts subordinate status. When you feel the urge to laugh without cause, do not laugh. The silence that replaces your nervous laugh will feel awkward initially. Persist regardless. Equally damaging is excessive nodding. The head bob whilst listening signals agreement before agreement has been earned. It transforms the listener into an audience receiving performance, rather than a judge assessing argument. Reduce your nodding to rare, deliberate acknowledgement. The rushed response is another leak of considerable consequence. Answering immediately after another finishes speaking suggests eagerness to please, anxiety about silence, lack of considered thought. A pause before response, even 2 seconds, transforms the dynamic entirely. I recommend what I call the leakage inventory. Request an honest observer, a friend willing to be brutal, to watch you in conversation and catalog your betrayals. What do you do when uncertain? What fills your silences? This inventory, though uncomfortable to receive, provides the map without which improvement is merely blind wandering. Select one leak to eliminate each week until your hull is sound. Making the pause your territory with leakages identified and under correction, we turn to what should replace them. Most men experience pause as pressure, as emptiness demanding to be filled, as social failure requiring immediate remedy. This chapter transforms your relationship with silence itself. You must learn not merely to tolerate pause, but to inhabit it, to use it, to make it the very foundation of your power. I witnessed the power of pause most vividly at a negotiation between 2 senior ministers. The first spoke fluently, brilliantly even, filling every moment with compelling points. The second said almost nothing. When questions were put to him, he paused, not for seconds, but for what felt to observers like minutes, before responding. The pause was excruciating to watch. To him, it appeared entirely comfortable. By the meeting's end, every significant concession had been made by the eloquent one. You see, silence creates pressure, but the pressure falls on the one who cannot tolerate it. This is what I call the pressure reversal. If you can wait, your opponent must act. His speech, when it comes, will contain concessions he did not intend to offer, revelations he meant to withhold. Silence is not neutral. It is aggressive in the gentlest possible way. The pause also serves what I call the consideration signal. When you pause before responding, you communicate that what was said deserved genuine consideration, and that your response represents considered judgment rather than reflexive reaction. The quick reply suggests you were preparing your answer whilst the other spoke. There is also the matter of rhythm control. He who controls the rhythm of conversation controls the conversation itself. The man who pauses sets his own rhythm and requires others to adapt to his pace rather than adapting to theirs. I distinguish three types of strategic pause. The first is the consideration pause, silence before speaking. The second is the emphasis pause, silence within speech that creates weight. The third is the finality pause, silence after speaking, that suggests complete confidence in what has been said. Begin with the consideration pause. When a question is directed at you, count silently to 3 before beginning your response. This feels unbearably long to you. It is actually barely noticeable to others. Extend gradually, 3 seconds, then 5, then as long as serves your purpose. A word of caution. A pause filled with visible discomfort is worse than no pause at all. The pause must be inhabited, not endured. The currency of attention, silence, and stillness are now established as disciplines you can cultivate. But presence requires more than the absence of nervous activity. There is an active element, the deployment of attention itself as a resource. Attention is currency, and like all currency, its value depends upon its scarcity. The man who looks at everyone looks at no one meaningfully. I think of a certain hostess whose gatherings were the most sought after in London society during my years there. Her secret was not the quality of her guests, nor the excellence of her food. It was the quality of her attention. When she attended to you, you felt as though you were the only person in that crowded room. When she turned away, you felt the loss profoundly and found yourself working to regain what had been withdrawn. The principle underlying this is simple. That which is rare is valued. That which is common is not. Your attention, if given constantly and indiscriminately, becomes worthless. No one treasures what is always available. But your attention, if granted rarely and meaningfully, becomes treasure. Others seek it, work for it, remember when they received it. When you do attend completely. Eye contact steady, posture oriented toward the speaker, expression engaged. This quality of attention is so rare that even brief exposure creates powerful impression. Half attention is worse than no attention. It signals that the recipient does not merit your full focus. Learn also to withdraw attention deliberately. The eyes that shift away, the posture that subtly reorients, these create urgency in the other to regain what was lost. The withdrawal must be subtle, not abrupt. Obvious withdrawal is rudeness. The art is in the gradation. I distinguish 4 levels of attention, which I call the attention ladder. The first is peripheral awareness, knowing someone is present without engaging. The second is acknowledgement attention, brief connection that recognizes without committing. The third is full attention, complete focus reserved for matters of genuine importance. The fourth is intimate attention, the rare and powerful connection reserved for moments of deepest significance. In your next group encounter, consciously ration your attention. Do not scan constantly. Fix your focus and allow others to work for it. When you shift focus, let the shift be visible, a deliberate reorientation that the new recipient experiences as gift. But remember, the powerful man's attention, when granted, is warm and genuine. That is precisely why it is valued. The theater of every encounter. Reading the room in 5 seconds, you now possess the individual disciplines. Leakage has been addressed, pause has been mastered, attention has been understood as currency. But individual disciplines do not guarantee their harmonious combination. Part 4 addresses integration, bringing together the separate skills into unified action across the genuine complexity of human affairs. Before deploying any technique, you must understand what is present in the room before you. Who holds power? Who seeks it? What tensions exist? What outcomes are possible? This reading occurs in the first 5 seconds and informs everything that follows. I recall entering a cabinet meeting during one of the many crises that punctuated those years of war, knowing I had to assess the political terrain before speaking a single word. In 5 seconds I noted, the Prime Minister's posture was defensive. He was under pressure. The Foreign Secretary had positioned himself distant from his usual allies. He was isolated. Conversation clusters had formed into 3 distinct factions. One chair sat conspicuously empty. Someone powerful was absent, creating both danger and opportunity. I have developed what I call the 5-point assessment framework. The first point is the power map. Who actually holds power in this room? Observe behavior, not titles. Who speaks without seeking permission? Whose statements go unchallenged? Where do eyes turn when decisions loom? The second point is the tension topology. What unspoken conflicts exist? Note who avoids whom, whose statements draw sharp responses. The third point is the alliance architecture. Who is aligned with whom? Observe physical proximity, eye contact patterns, verbal support. The fourth point is the energy assessment. What is the emotional temperature? High energy suggests conflict. Low energy suggests fatigue. Your intervention must calibrate to this temperature. The fifth point is the outcome horizon. What outcomes are actually possible? Not what you want, but what the configuration of forces permits. In every encounter, pause at the threshold, physically or mentally, and run through these 5 assessments. This takes mere seconds with practice. Do not commit to action until assessment is complete. 2 warnings. The danger of analysis paralysis is real. Assessment informs action. It does not replace it. Guard also against projection, seeing what you expect rather than what exists. The art of calibrated command rooms are now read. Now comes calibration. The same gesture that commands in one setting reads as absurd in another. The same silence that impresses in formal negotiation alienates in casual conversation. True mastery is not rigid application, but fluid adaptation. This chapter teaches when to be formidable, when to be approachable, and how to modulate between them. I recall 2 encounters on the same day, a formal audience with the king in the morning, an informal luncheon with colleagues in the afternoon. The presence appropriate to the morning, grave, measured, formally still, would have been ludicrous at luncheon. The ease appropriate to luncheon would have been disrespectful in the royal presence. I succeeded in both because I calibrated. The man who uses one approach everywhere fails in most places. Every encounter sits somewhere on the formality scale. High formality calls for more stillness, longer pauses, more economical speech. Low formality permits more movement, quicker response, warmer engagement. Read the formality of the encounter and calibrate accordingly. There is also the stakes assessment. High-stakes encounters require maximum presence. Low-stakes encounters permit relaxation. Using full presence for trivial matters exhausts you and alienates others. Save your full authority for moments that warrant it. The relationship factor matters as well. Presence with strangers differs from presence with intimates. The reserve appropriate with unknown quantities becomes coldness with friends. The warmth appropriate with friends becomes presumption with strangers. Calibrate to relationship as well as context. Learn also the modulation technique, the ability to shift calibration within encounters as circumstances change. A meeting that begins formally may require shift to collaboration as trust develops. A casual conversation may suddenly become serious. The master reads these shifts and adjusts presence accordingly. Before each significant encounter, consciously assess what level of formality does this require? What are the stakes? What is my relationship to those present? Set your calibration deliberately rather than defaulting to habit. Then remain alert for signals that recalibration is needed. The most common error is using one calibration for all encounters. The second error is failing to recalibrate when encounters shift. The 3 theaters of power. This chapter examines 3 fundamental relationship contexts: leading subordinates, engaging equals, and operating before superiors, and how silent command adapts to each. The same principles apply throughout, but their application differs significantly. I recall navigating the Admiralty in the years before the Great War. I led subordinates who needed to believe in my certainty. I engaged equals who tested my resolve at every opportunity. I operated before superiors, the Prime Minister, eventually the King himself, who would decide my political fate. In each theater, silence served different purposes. The command appropriate downward became presumption upward, and weakness laterally. In the theater of leadership, the finality principle governs. Decisions delivered without explanation are questioned less than decisions elaborately justified. This is what we shall do invites execution. We should do this because invites debate. The leader who explains every decision transforms every decision into a negotiation. Additionally, selective engagement applies. Attend fully to work that matters. Withdraw attention from triviality. Subordinates learn what you value by observing what captures your focus. In the theater of equals, the patient's advantage governs. Among equals, victory often goes not to the best argument, but to the steadiest nerve. Allow opponents to defeat themselves through their own verbosity, whilst you accumulate small advantages through composure. The comfort projection also applies. He who appears most comfortable in the encounter gains subtle dominance. Your ease creates their unease. Their unease produces concessions. In the theater of ambition, operating before superiors, the weight principle governs. The subordinate who chatters is overlooked. The subordinate who speaks seldom but with weight is noticed, remembered, promoted. Say less, mean more. The observation advantage also applies. Your silence whilst others speak allows you to observe what they reveal. Superiors appreciate the subordinate who sees more than he says. Identify your most challenging theater and focus your practice there. Most men have a natural strength, often leading subordinates, and a natural weakness, often engaging equals or operating before superiors. Your growth lies in strengthening what is weak. The cardinal error is using one theater's approach in another. Command appropriate to subordinates reads as arrogance to equals and presumption to superiors. The sovereignty of self-command skills and judgment are now established, but something remains incomplete. What is the ultimate purpose of this power? Is it merely technique, or does it connect to something deeper? This final part explores the deepest dimension, how silent command reflects and develops something far more important than influence over others, sovereignty over yourself. The ancient Stoics understood that true power lies not in controlling external circumstances, but in governing one's own responses to those circumstances. Silent command is ultimately the application of this wisdom, the mastery of anxiety, of the need for approval, of the fear of being misunderstood. What others perceive as authority over them is really sovereignty over yourself made visible. I recall my wilderness years, when my warnings about the gathering storm went unheeded, when I was mocked in the very chambers where I had once commanded attention. External circumstances were beyond my control. Internal responses were not. I chose to speak my truth without expectation of approval, to maintain composure without hope of vindication. When vindication finally came, I was ready, not because circumstances had changed, but because I had governed myself through years when nothing else could be governed. I identify what I call the sovereignty sequence. First, govern your fear. Then, govern your need for approval. Then, govern your reactions to provocation. Only then can you govern others. And only then do you deserve to. This sequence cannot be bypassed. Skipping steps produces false authority that crumbles under pressure. Most men are enslaved to the opinions of others. Every word, every gesture is shaped by the desperate question, how am I being perceived? Liberation from this slavery is the foundation of genuine presence. When you no longer need approval, you finally deserve it. This is what I call the approval liberation. There is also what I term the reaction choice. Between stimulus and response lies a space. In that space lies choice. The master of silent command has expanded that space until no stimulus produces uncontrolled reaction. He receives information, processes it, and chooses response. Always chooses, never merely reacts. Within you exists what I call the interior fortress, a citadel that external circumstances cannot breach, unless you permit. Cultivating this fortress is the ultimate discipline. From this fortress you engage the world without being undone by it. A word of caution: the danger is confusing self-command with isolation. The Stoics did not advocate withdrawal from human connection. They advocated engaging from strength rather than need. The paradox of deeper connection, self-command, is established. Now we address what seems like paradox, how silence creates deeper connection than speech. This chapter reveals a truth that appears contradictory but is not. The man who speaks less is heard more. The man who holds back commands more devotion. The deepest connections form not through torrents of words, but through quality of attention. I think of my relationship with Clementine, who understood me better than anyone despite, or perhaps because of, our shared capacity for meaningful silence. Many of our deepest moments involved no words at all. A glance across a crowded room, a silent evening by the fire, the comfort of presence without the burden of performance. She taught me that connection does not require constant communication. It requires quality of attention that constant communication often prevents. When you truly attend to another, silently, completely, without preparing your response whilst they speak, you offer something rare and precious. In a world of divided attention, complete attention is profound generosity. This is what I call the attention gift. Most people rarely receive it. When you give it, you create bonds that eloquence could never forge. Your silence also creates space for others to fill. They reveal themselves more fully than they would against the resistance of your words. You learn more in silence than you ever could through questioning. This is the space creation principle. The listener who says nothing learns everything. The questioner who speaks constantly learns only what he already suspected. When you speak less, what you say carries more weight. Others attend more carefully because experience has taught them that your words are chosen, not reflexive. This is the significant signal in operation, but now serving connection rather than command. The most intimate moments often involve no words. Physical proximity, shared silence, the comfort of being together without pressure to perform. These create bonds that chatter destroys. This is the intimacy of presence. Words are often barriers to intimacy, not bridges toward it. In your next significant conversation with someone you care about, practice pure listening. No advice, no stories of your own, no solution. Simply attend completely. Notice what happens. The other opens more deeply, reveals more fully, feels more connected. A word of caution. The error is applying influence techniques to intimate relationships. With loved ones, the goal is connection, not command. Reserve your techniques for encounters where influence is appropriate. The still point in a turning world. This final chapter presents the ultimate vision. What it means to become the still point in a turning world. The gravity that bends the paths of others. The presence that requires no announcement. The promise of this work is not muteness, but selectivity. Speaking when speech improves upon silence, allowing silence to speak when it serves better. I speak now of my own journey. The paradox of the great talker who commends silence. I have given many speeches in my life, some of them perhaps not entirely without merit. Yet I tell you now, with the conviction of long experience, that my words were always most powerful when they emerged from silence and returned to it, when they were the exception rather than the rule, the peak rather than the plateau. The man I became was made not by my speeches, but by the silences from which they arose. Influence flows not from the volume of communication, but from its weight. Weight is determined as much by what is withheld as by what is offered. Speak when speech improves upon silence. In all other moments, let silence speak. This is the selective voice that you must cultivate. The world grows noisier, the talkers multiply, the clamor increases. But the master stands apart, still amidst chaos, unmoved amidst frantic motion. This stillness is not absence, but presence of the most powerful kind. You become what I call the still point. The center of the wheel that does not move yet enables all motion. Massive objects bend space around themselves. Others fall toward them by natural law. Sufficient presence operates similarly. It bends the paths of others, draws them toward you, organizes encounters around your position. This is not manipulation, but nature. This is the gravity principle. What you have learned is a beginning, not an end. These principles deepen through years of application. Mastery that seems complete reveals further depths. This is the lifelong practice that awaits you. Carry these principles into every encounter. Begin each day with intention. Today I shall speak only when speech improves upon silence. End each day with review. Where did I speak unnecessarily? Where did silence serve? A final warning. The danger is complacency. Mastery is not achieved and maintained, it is practiced and deepened. The moment you believe you have arrived is the moment decline begins. Remain the student, even as you become the master. The world will not become quieter because you do. The talkers will continue to talk. The noise will continue to increase. But you will stand apart. The still point in a turning world. the gravity that bends the paths of others, the presence that requires no announcement. In a world drowning in words, you will possess something rare and irreplaceable, the authority of one who needs not speak to be heard. The world awaits. Let us begin.